So this is why you're losing your homes. This is why you're losing your jobs. This is why the whole world is going awry around us. Not just for the monetary manifestations of this issue, of this obfuscation of the currency, but for the political ones as well. Why is it that none of these politicians will debate me about mathematically perfected economy? Why is it that the only thing that they can come up with as a purported solution is to help the bankers? And what is their argument even for that? They're claiming that if we sustain these banks, that across a difficult time, that somehow a process which we now understand is terminal is somehow going to be resume on the other end of that somehow all right. Well, we've been told that for many years, and in truth, when we understand this process, we actually understand a much more important thing that goes back across our entire lifespans. We've been told a lie all of our lives, and another lie, a part of this huge lie. And that lie is that business goes through cycles. It goes through it goes into prosperity and then it drops out in recession. That this natural thing is a boom and bust is somehow something that we all can only hope to suffer. Well, sure, that's exactly how it would be. In other words, if I build a $100,000 home in nature, I have it. Okay? But under what these guys are telling us is economy, I've got to give up 5 houses to a guy who just published the evidence that I built the house. Now, if we were a united people, we would all be shaking our heads and we would be saying, no way. Absolutely impossible. When I'm asked to appear in court to defend my failure of my mortgage, I'm not going to say the bank lost my contract, therefore no debt existed ostensibly. The judge is going to be saying to himself, well, I don't think so. He's also going to be wanting to understand where that contract went, though. He's going to know that something is wrong. Something is very wrong. But unless you introduce this terminal obfuscation of the currency as the inevitable underlying cause of your failure to make good on your promise to pay, sorry, you don't have the argument that's undefeatable. And this is why we have to understand this. So the banks are just issuers of our promissory obligations. They merely publish the evidence of our obligations to pay out of circulation whatever we owed each other. And that's a cut and dry thing. It is not a matter of opinion. Those are the actual facts. This is the situation. This is our circumstance. This is the lie that's been imposed upon us, reduced to its bare facts. No one can deny this much. Does the bank give up anything of value? You mean to tell me that the banks actually gave up something of value equivalent to all of the things it's ever financed, plus all the interest on it, that we can't even pay, and we owe that yet to them? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. If we were different tribes of Native Americans and Europeans came over and tried to do this to us, we'd be shaking our heads and saying these people are crazy. And this is the fact. I mean, a friend of mine, we were talking about mathematically perfected economy years ago, and it was registering with John Bear, and John. John says, I originally learned these things from my grandmother. I said, your grandmother? He says, yeah. She was illiterate. She couldn't read or write, but they used to sit around a table in what they called a sewing circle. And they would talk about these things, and not this obfuscation of the currency so much, but they talked about what was wrong with it. And in particular, John was telling me what his grandmother had taught him, or what he had learned from listening to what was the discussions at the sewing circle about Alexander Hamilton, how he was the inevitable ruin of our country. And you can understand all these things. History all of a sudden has, it's stripped of all the false dimensions that it was given on purpose, so that we never understand these things. Suddenly you realize, once you understand this obfuscation of the currency, what Alexander Hamilton really represented. Students of history will recall that what he was advocating was that we acquire credit, which is an obfuscated appeal to assume debt. And as we understand now, it's not only an obfuscated appeal to assume debt, it's an obfuscated appeal to assume an artificial debt which enriches a banking system which only produces our evidence of our promissory obligations to each other, yet it enriches the banking system just on account of allowing them to collect the principal and launder it into their possession. It enriches the banking system so much as all the principal that's ever created by this obfuscation, merely publishing the evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. Hey, give me that job and allow me to keep all the principal in the world. Actually, I don't want it. It's a rhetorical statement. But imagine how unjustifiably that enriches a select few, further enabling them to buy all the politicians which are necessary to keep happy, to keep this thing in existence above every republic in the world, which fails to understand the real issues which are upon it. Now, when I went home from this day at high school, my mind was somewhat troubled, I suppose, that there was so obviously so little interest or understanding of actual economy. At the same time, I realized that obviously it was very plausible that we had already realized what the solutions of two categoric faults of this pretended economy are. That is, inflation and deflation, and inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of artificial indebtedness. The latter is solved, of course, by eradicating interest, and now we understand that, no, we don't have to look to banks to loan us money at interest. In fact, all they're doing is publishing the evidence of our promissory obligations to each other whenever we assume a debt to the person, to the real creditor who gives up property for our promissory note. You see, the bank gives up nothing. They merely intervene upon all transactions where anything is ever financed, and that's how all this quote-unquote money comes into circulation. Okay, so now inflation and deflation. It's funny. People have, for 40 years looked at me out the corner of their eye as soon as I said the words mathematically perfected economy, and immediately enter into a state of doubt. Good example of this was, I called the Ron Paul campaign headquarters at the, during the 2008 election, and I spoke to a fellow, I think his name was Andrew, and I explained who I was, Mike Montagne, founder of People for Mathematically Perfected Economy and original author of Mathematically Perfected Economy. And this fellow interrupts me immediately, practically laughs out loud. He says, he actually utters a typical retort of the so-called Austrian economist. Now, Ron Paul proudly boasts he's an Austrian economist, as if, we should know from those words that whatever he says is or advocates is somehow justified. And we're going to have to get into all those things in order for us to understand all the issues that are involved and to put into perspective, what is solution. We need to actually walk through developing it ourselves. But in any case, this fellow says to me right away, he interrupts me, he says, everyone knows there's no such thing as a mathematically perfected economy. Imagine that. If that were true, we would be unable to account for our affairs rightly, as if there is no way to. And already I think you will realize that obviously there is. We know how to solve this terminal failure by interest. But I have a standard reply to this, which, I've answered to this assertion literally probably, 10,000 plus times in my life. So I said to this fellow, Andrew, I said, you mean to tell me that if inflation and deflation are defined respectively as either increases or decreases in circulation for represented wealth, there is no solution for inflation and deflation? Well, there was a long pause, long silence on the other end of the telephone. And finally this fellow says to me, I can't debate that with you, sir. Well, why not? Who would ever say such a thing without at least a plausible idea that they're right? Let's think about this. If the definitions of inflation and deflation are respectively increases or decreases in the volume of circulation per represented wealth, how would we solve them? This is second grade math. There is only one solution for inflation and deflation, and that is to maintain a circulation which at all times is equal to the wealth it represents. So, in the case of a $100,000 home with a 100-year lifespan, what would that mean? That means that halfway through its consumption, half of the money that was originally paid into circulation to the real creditor who built the house, half of that money is still in existence, equal to the remaining value of the house. And in fact, that relationship is indispensable to maintaining the integrity of the currency. Why? Because that many units of circulation represent that much remaining value of the house without any change all through time. That relationship and that relationship only. And what maintains that relationship then? One thing and one thing only. And that is to pay out of circulation. Remember, principal has to be retired. To pay the debt off, to pay it out of circulation, to retire the principal at the rate of consumption or depreciation of the related property. So what do we have? If we have a $100,000 house, and just for the sake of simplification, I'm going to discuss a linear rate of depreciation, that is 1 year or 1% of value out of every year of a 100-year lifespan. So, in effect, a $100,000 home depreciates linearly for the sake of explanation, $1,000 a year, or $83.33 a month. So, if we pay out of circulation $1,000 a year for 50 years of the 100-year lifespan, 50 years are left, and $50,000 of remaining value exists, then the $50,000 of circulation which remain in circulation equal the remaining value of the house. Likewise, there's a $50,000 obligation which remains to pay the remaining $50,000 out of circulation at the rate of consumption of the rest of the house. All three of those things are constantly equal under mathematically perfected economy then, which we understand then is simply two things. All mathematically perfected economy is number one, eradication of interest, which isn't even owed to the publishers of our promissory obligations to each other. And 2, it's an obligatory schedule of payment. That is, to retire principal at the rate of consumption or depreciation of the related property. So that is what mathematically perfected economy is. That's it. That's all you have to understand. Now, if we really want to get our heads around this so